The rain had been falling for hours, soft and endless, turning the streets of Dorian-sur-Tusson into mirrors of light and shadow. Neon signs blurred in the puddles, red and blue reflections trembling across cracked asphalt. The desert wind had gone still, leaving the city holding its breath. She was sitting on the curb outside a shuttered convenience store, knees drawn to her chest, hair plastered to her face. Marisol Reyes had been walking for hours with no destination, just motion, away from the apartment she couldn't return to, away from the voice that had shattered her composure. The sound of her own crying startled her. It was quiet at first, a single breath caught in her throat, then another, until the rhythm broke and she bowed her head into her hands. That's when she heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, cutting through the rain. A man's voice, low and controlled, came from the dark. "You're on the wrong side of town to fall apart." Marisol looked up. A tall man stood beneath the awning of a closed cafe, rain rolling off the brim of his black coat. He stepped forward into the glow of the streetlight. His hair was dark, slicked back by the rain, his expression calm but not unkind. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I'm fine." "You're not." She stood, clutching her bag against her chest. "You don't know me." He moved closer, unhurried. "I know trouble when I see it." The way he said it wasn't threatening. It was something else. Almost protective. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, though her voice betrayed her. He sighed softly, then shrugged off his jacket. The fabric was heavy, dark wool, clearly expensive. He crossed the space between them and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it startled her. It smelled faintly of rain and cedar smoke. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need your charity." "This isn't charity," he replied. "It's respect. You don't cry in my streets, understand?" Her eyes flickered up to meet his. "Your streets?" He smiled faintly. "For tonight, yes. Until you can walk them without shaking." Something in his tone, half command, half promise, silenced her. He led her into the cafe, though it had been closed for hours. The lights came on with a soft hum, and she realized he had a key. He moved behind the counter, poured coffee into 2 cups, and slid one across the table toward her. "Sit," he said. She hesitated. "Do you always order strangers around?" "Only the ones crying in the rain." Marisol sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of dark roast and something sweeter. After a moment, she asked, "Who are you?" He met her gaze. "Name's Raphael." "That's not really an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." She studied him. The way his jaw tensed when he looked away. The quiet authority in his movements. He wasn't loud or cruel, but there was something about him that made the air feel heavier. "You own this place?" she asked. "For now." "Must be nice to own things." He tilted his head. "You say that like you've lost something." Marisol looked down at her coffee. "Maybe I did." He didn't press. He only watched her with that unsettling stillness that made her feel seen and cornered all at once. Finally, he said, "Whatever you're running from, it's not here." Her throat tightened. "You don't know that?" "I know it's not chasing you tonight," he said quietly. "Because I won't let it," she almost laughed. "You think you can just protect random people you find crying in the street?" "No," he said. "Only the ones who shouldn't be." The words landed somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where hope and fear lived side by side. An hour passed. The rain softened to a whisper. Raphael stood, refilling her cup, then leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Tell me your name," he said. She hesitated. "Marisol. Pretty name. I didn't ask for compliments." "Didn't give one," he said. "Just told the truth." She frowned, hiding her smile behind the rim of her cup. He nodded toward the jacket still draped around her shoulders. "You can bring that back tomorrow." "Who says I'm coming back?" "I do. Why?" "Because people don't leave my streets broken," he said softly. "They leave standing." She met his gaze, unsure whether to laugh or cry again. You talk like you own the whole city. Raphael smiled faintly. Maybe I just care more about it than most. He checked his watch, then stepped toward the door. Come on, I'll walk you home. She shook her head. You don't have to. I know, he said. But I will. They walked in silence through the damp streets, the air thick with petrichor and the hum of far-off traffic. Every so often, Raphael would glance at her, as if making sure she was still there, still breathing. When they reached her building, an old complex with peeling paint and flickering lights, she stopped at the gate. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Get some rest. She hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of his jacket. You'll get this back tomorrow. I'll hold you to that. And then he was gone, disappearing into the mist. Inside, Marisol hung the jacket over a chair. The weight of it felt strange. Not just fabric, but something else. A reminder of the man who spoke like the city belonged to him, who saw her when no one else had. She lay awake long after midnight, the rain starting up again outside. And somewhere in the rhythm of it, she heard his voice. You don't cry in my streets, understand? The words weren't a command anymore. They were a promise she wasn't sure she wanted to believe, but couldn't stop hearing. Morning arrived softly. The light diffused through low clouds that still smelled faintly of rain. Marisol woke to the sound of her neighbor's radio drifting through the thin walls, a Spanish ballad about heartbreak and roads that never end. Raphael's jacket still hung over the back of her chair. She ran her fingers over the coarse wool, surprised at how much warmth still clung to it. She wasn't sure whether to return it or keep it close a little longer. Outside, the city had that rare quiet it only found after a storm. The asphalt shimmered like glass, the air clean enough to taste. She dressed, tied her hair back, and headed for the small cafe where she'd first met him, her pulse unsteady for reasons she didn't want to name. Raphael was there. He sat at the corner table near the window, coffee untouched, his phone face down beside it. His posture was easy but alert, the kind of stillness that comes from always being ready to move. When she entered, he looked up, not with surprise, but with a small nod that said he knew she'd come. You kept your word, he said. I didn't say I would. He smiled faintly. But you did. She held out the jacket. I brought this back. Keep it, he said. Rain comes back too. I can take care of myself. I know, he said. But sometimes it's nice to be reminded you don't have to. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat down across from him. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of conversation and the clatter of cups. After a moment, she asked, So what do you do, Raphael? He stirred his coffee, considering. I fix things. What kind of things? Broken ones, he said simply. That's not an answer. He smiled without looking at her. It's the only one I've got. For the next hour, they talked. Or rather, he listened. Marisol told him about her mother in El Paso, her job at the bookstore that barely paid rent, the nights she walked to keep her mind quiet. She hadn't meant to say so much, but something about his silence drew the words out of her. When she finally asked about him, his gaze drifted toward the window, where sunlight spilled across wet pavement. I wasn't always from here, he said. I came south to start over, left behind people who didn't know how to let go of old debts. Family? She asked. He shook his head. Something like that. She hesitated, sensing the line she shouldn't cross. Is that why you walk around like you own the streets? He looked back at her then, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pride, but recognition. I don't own them, he said quietly. I just remember what it cost to keep them safe once. Marisol frowned. Safe from what? He didn't answer. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. She realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him, though she didn't understand why. When she left the cafe, he followed a few paces behind. Let me walk you, he said. You don't have to. I know. They walked through the neighborhood together, past murals fading under the sun, past the scent of tortillas and diesel from food trucks setting up for lunch. Raphael greeted almost everyone they passed. A few nodded back with respect, others with quiet wariness. "You know everyone here," Marisol said. "Only the ones who matter. And who decides that?" He smiled without humor. "The city does. It has its own memory." She watched him for a long moment. "You talk like someone who's lost more than he admits." He met her gaze. "Maybe I have." They stopped outside her building. The air was still damp, the sky pale gray. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For making me feel like I belong somewhere, even if it's just a few blocks of your streets." He tilted his head slightly, as if the words caught him off guard. "You do belong. You just forgot how to stand still long enough to notice." She smiled. "A small, uncertain thing. Maybe you can remind me." He studied her face, the quiet strength behind her exhaustion. "Maybe I already have." That evening she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face in the rain. Calm, certain, the kind of face that carried history in silence. She rose, restless, and pulled the jacket around her shoulders. The fabric still smelled faintly of him. Smoke, leather, rain. From her window she saw the reflection of headlights in the alley below. A dark car idled at the curb, her heart quickened. A figure stepped out, not Raphael. Someone else. They stood in the rain for a moment, looking up toward her building, then slipped something under the door to the stairwell before driving away. Marisol hesitated before going downstairs. The paper on the concrete was soaked through but legible. "Leave town. He can't protect you." Her hands trembled. She looked down the street, but the car was gone. She clutched the note to her chest and whispered into the quiet, "What have you done, Raphael?" Across town, Raphael sat alone in the empty cafe, the lights dim. His phone buzzed once, a message with no name attached. He read it, jaw tightening. They found her. He looked out at the rain starting up again. His reflection blurred in the glass. Under his breath, he said the words that had already become a prayer. "You don't cry in my streets, Marisol. Not now, not ever." Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and walked into the storm. The next morning, Tucson woke under a pale sky, washed clean by another night of rain. The light slanted through the blinds in thin silver stripes, cutting across Marisol's floor like the bars of a quiet cage. The note still sat on her table, edges curled, ink blurred, the words "he can't protect you" smudged but still legible. She had read it too many times to count. Raphael hadn't come by. The cafe had been dark when she walked past, the door locked, the blinds drawn. She told herself it didn't matter. But her hands shook when she tied her hair, and she checked the street twice before leaving the apartment. The city felt different. The usual noise, car horns, street vendors, laughter spilling from open windows, seemed dulled, as if the world had lowered its volume to let her fear breathe. By noon, she couldn't stay still. She walked to the cafe again, drawn by something she didn't want to name. When she reached it, the door was unlocked. The place was empty except for the smell of coffee and rain-soaked wood. She hesitated, then stepped inside. On the counter sat a single mug, half full, still warm. "Raphael?" she called. Her voice echoed. Then she saw him in the back, standing near the window, his coat half off, his shirt sleeves rolled. He looked like he hadn't slept. When he turned, the tiredness in his face startled her. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you." He exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Someone left you a note." She froze. "You knew?" "I saw them watching your building last night." Her pulse raced. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't want to scare you." "Well, it's too late for that." He rubbed his temples. "Marisol." "No," she said, voice rising. "I need you to tell me what's going on. Who are you, really?" He looked at her for a long time, the silence stretching until it felt like it might break. Then he said, "You already know. You've known since the night we met." She shook her head. "I don't know anything." "Yes, you do," he said. "You knew the moment I told you not to cry in my streets. You knew these weren't just words." Marisol stared at him. "You talk like you own this city." "I don't own it," he said softly. I made sure it stayed standing. What does that mean? He hesitated, then stepped closer. His voice dropped, quieter now, steady but raw. There are people who think they can take what they want from anyone too tired to fight back. I used to be one of them. I spent years making the rules instead of breaking them, and one day I looked around and realized I'd built something I couldn't live in. So you just walked away? She asked. I tried to, he said. But men like me don't get to walk away. We just learn to hide in plain sight. The words hit her like cold water. So the people watching me, they're not after you, he said quickly. They're after me. And I'm just collateral? No. He stepped forward, his voice rough. You're the first person I've met in years who doesn't look at me like a ghost. You were crying and I didn't see weakness. I saw someone who still had a heart. I couldn't let the world take that from you. Tears burned behind her eyes. You said you wanted to protect me. But from what? From you? He went still, his jaw tightening. I would never hurt you, he said, not even if it meant saving myself. Then tell me the truth. He looked down, as if the words cost him. I used to work for a man who thought fear was the only language people understood. I left when I realized I'd started speaking it fluently. Marisol's hands trembled. And now? Now I'm trying to unlearn it, he said. But that doesn't mean the people who taught it have forgotten me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, charged. Finally, she whispered, You should have let me walk away that night. He gave a small, broken smile. If I had, I wouldn't have remembered what it felt like to care. Her throat tightened. And what happens now? Raphael turned toward the window. The rain had started again, faint but steady. Now I make sure they never get near you. She shook her head. You can't fix everything. He looked back at her, eyes dark, voice low. I can try. Later that night, she found herself standing outside the cafe again. The lights were still off. She could see his shadow moving inside, pacing. She almost turned away. Almost. But something stronger than fear kept her there. When he opened the door, surprise flashed across his face, followed by something softer. I thought you'd left. I should have, she said, but I couldn't. He stepped aside, letting her in. The air smelled of rain and coffee and exhaustion. She looked up at him. If they're coming for you, I'm not going anywhere. He frowned. You don't understand what you're saying. Yes, I do, she said. I'm tired of running from everything that hurts. His shoulders dropped, the fight in him faltering. Marisol, she reached for his hand. You told me not to cry in your streets, so teach me how not to. He stared at her for a long time, then closed his eyes, a faint tremor running through him. You don't know what that promise costs. Then let me pay part of it, she whispered. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain on the glass. Then Raphael turned his hand, fingers closing around hers. Outside, thunder rolled again over the desert, low and distant. Inside the small cafe, two people stood in the quiet, both carrying secrets too heavy for the world, finding something like peace in each other's silence. And as lightning flashed across the street, illuminating their reflections in the window, Raphael thought, not for the first time, that maybe redemption didn't come in prayers or bargains. Maybe it came in the moment someone saw you as human. Again, the storm came without warning. Hard rain sweeping in from the desert. Wind bending the palm trees along the street until they looked like they might break. The sky burned gray-blue with lightning, and the air pulsed with electricity, the kind that made every breath taste like metal and memory. Marisol stood at the window of her apartment, watching the storm roll over Tucson. The lights flickered once, twice. Her reflection looked like someone she didn't quite recognize. Stronger, maybe, but also more tired. She had chosen to stay, and she could feel the weight of that choice in her chest like a second heartbeat. Raphael hadn't come by since that night. But the city hadn't been quiet. Shadows moving near the cafe, cars parked too long at corners, faces she didn't know pretending not to watch her. She tried not to panic. He had said he'd take care of it. He always did. But tonight the rain felt different. It wasn't cleansing. It was warning. When the knock came, she didn't hesitate. Raphael stood there, soaked to the bone, his expression sharp with something between exhaustion and urgency. The rain traced silver lines down his face. "Pack a bag," he said. "What? Why?" "They're close," her pulse stuttered. "Who?" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Just, please, do what I say." She didn't move. "Raphael, talk to me." He stepped closer, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "I told you I'd keep you safe. That hasn't changed. But if you stay here tonight, I can't promise you'll still be breathing by morning." Her breath caught. "You said there wouldn't be danger." "I said I'd handle it," he corrected softly. "That's not the same thing." She searched his face for a lie, but found none. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere quiet, just until it's over." "And when will it be over?" He looked away. "When I make sure they understand what's mine." Her voice trembled. "I'm not yours, Raphael." His eyes met hers again, rain dripping from his lashes. "You are the only thing left that feels real. That's worse than being mine." The drive out of the city was silent except for the sound of the rain hammering against the windshield. The desert blurred into shadow. Marisol watched the lights of Tucson fade behind them and felt the ache of something final in her chest. After a while, she said, "You can't keep living like this." "I've been living like this since before you were old enough to run," he said quietly. "Then maybe it's time you stopped." He smiled faintly, eyes on the road. "You don't stop being what you are, Marisol. You just try to be better at hiding it." "Maybe you don't have to hide." "You think the world forgives men like me?" "I think people do," she said. "If you let them." For a moment he didn't answer. Then he whispered, "You're not supposed to believe in me this much. It'll get you hurt." "Maybe believing is the only thing keeping me alive," she said. They stopped at a small motel on the edge of town. The sign buzzed weakly, half the letters burned out. The rain softened to a steady drizzle. Raphael carried her bag inside, dropped it by the door, and ran a hand through his wet hair. "Get some sleep. We'll leave at dawn." She stood in the middle of the room, watching him pace. "You're not planning to stay, are you?" He paused. "If I go now, I can keep them from coming here." "And what if you don't come back?" He smiled, tired and small. "Then you'll know I tried." "No," she said, stepping forward. "You don't get to walk away this time." He turned, and something raw flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand. Yes, I do," she snapped. "You think disappearing will fix things, but it never does. You said no one cries in your streets, remember? That means you don't either." Her voice broke on the last word. He froze. Then, slowly, he crossed the room. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "You were supposed to be the one thing untouched by all this." "I'm not untouched," she said. "I'm just not afraid of the parts of you that are." He looked at her for a long time, and in that silence, the storm outside began to ease. Finally, he said, "If I stay, they'll keep coming. And one day, it'll be your door they knock on instead of mine. Then let them knock," she whispered. "I'll answer it with you." Something inside him cracked then, not loudly, but deeply. His jaw trembled, his breath uneven. He cupped her face in both hands. "You don't know what you're asking me to be." "Yes, I do," she said. "I'm asking you to be human." The rain stopped completely. The desert held its breath. Raphael leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "If I stay, everything changes." "Good," she whispered. "It's time something did." They stayed awake until dawn, sitting in silence by the window as the first light spilled across the horizon. Raphael watched the sky like a man who didn't believe in second chances but wanted to. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, steady. "You could still leave." Marisol looked at him. "So could you." He smiled then, not the sharp, guarded smile she'd first seen, but something softer, something real. "Maybe we both already did," he said. Outside, the sun rose slow and golden, cutting through the clouds. Inside, the world shifted. The storm had taken everything that wasn't real, and what was left? 2 broken souls. The echo of a promise felt almost like peace. And as the light filled the room, Raphael reached for her hand, the same one he had covered with his jacket that first night, and said quietly, almost to himself, "You don't cry in my streets, understand?" Marisol squeezed his hand back. "Then don't give me a reason to." The desert looked different when the rains were gone. The sky stretched forever, wide, forgiving, the color of promise instead of fear. The earth steamed faintly from the night's storm, and the air smelled of wet dust and new beginnings. Marisol stood outside the motel, the wind playing with the hem of her dress. Behind her, the door clicked softly as Raphael stepped out. The circles under his eyes were still there, but the hard set of his jaw had eased. He looked at her for a long moment, as though memorizing the way morning light touched her face. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you." He smiled faintly. "Old habits. Maybe it's time for new ones." He walked past her, stretching his arms, the rising sun catching the faint scar on his wrist. "You think that's how it works? You just wake up one day and become someone else?" She turned to him. "No, you wake up and decide not to be who you were yesterday." For the first time since she'd known him, he didn't have an answer. They left the motel an hour later, the sky turning a deeper shade of blue as the sun rose higher. Raphael drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely against the open window. The wind tore through his hair, carrying the smell of dust and creosote. Marisol watched the landscape blur, red rock, saguaro cactus, the endless horizon. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. He smiled. "Somewhere that doesn't remember me." "Does such a place exist?" "Maybe not," he said, "but we'll find out." By noon, they reached a small town near the border, a collection of adobe houses and rust-colored roofs nestled between two dry hills. Children played soccer in the street, their laughter echoing against the walls. An old woman sold tamales from a cart under a wide umbrella. It felt like another world. They parked by a diner with a faded sign that read El Cielo Café. The smell of coffee and cinnamon drifted through the open door. Inside, the ceiling fans spun lazily, stirring the warm air. Marisol ordered for both of them, her Spanish slipping back into the rhythm of her childhood. Raphael sat across from her, quiet, almost shy. "This place feels like home," she said. "Does home feel this quiet?" "It could," she said, "if you let it." He watched her for a long time, then nodded. "Maybe I will." When the food came, she noticed the way his hands trembled slightly around the cup. Not from fear, but from release. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel strange," he admitted. "Like I've been carrying a weight so long I forgot what it was made of." "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now it feels like it was made of ghosts." Marisol reached across the table, resting her fingers over his. "Then stop feeding them." He looked down at their hands, then up at her. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said softly. "But it's simple." They stayed in the town for days that blurred into weeks. Raphael found work repairing engines for a local garage. Marisol helped at the small school near the plaza, translating, teaching English. Every evening, they would meet at the same cafe as the sun dipped behind the hills, and the streets filled with the sound of guitars and laughter. Sometimes, Raphael would lean back in his chair, eyes closed, listening to the music, and Marisol would watch the way peace slowly reshaped his face. Once, she asked him, "Do you ever miss the life you left behind?" He opened his eyes. "No, I miss who I thought I was in it. And now? Now I'm learning to be someone else's beginning instead of their ending." On the last night of summer, a storm brewed far off in the distance. The lightning flashed faintly across the horizon, but the rain never came. The air was heavy, electric. Marisol stood on the rooftop of their small apartment, looking out at the lights of the town below. Raphael joined her, a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, the faint smell of engine oil and soap on his skin. He leaned against the railing beside her. "You still thinking about running?" "Not anymore," she said. "I'm tired of running from what I want." He turned to her, quiet for a long moment. "And what do you want?" She smiled, not looking away. "Peace, you." maybe both, if I'm lucky. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers like a question. You shouldn't want someone like me. She squeezed his hand. Then stop being someone like you. A low laugh escaped him, soft and genuine. You make redemption sound so simple. It is, she said. It just hurts more than sinning. He looked at her then, really looked. And in his eyes, she saw the man he might have been all along, the one who'd stood in the rain and told her she didn't have to cry. The one who was finally learning not to cry either. When the first drops of rain finally fell, they didn't run for cover. They stood on the roof, the water cool against their faces, the town below blurred by mist. Raphael's coat was gone, his voice low against the storm. You don't cry in my streets, understand? He murmured. Marisol smiled through the rain. Then don't make me, he laughed. Pulled her close and kissed her, not as a promise, not as an apology, but as something new. The thunder rolled softly above them, like the earth exhaling, and for the first time, there were no ghosts left between them. Just the rain. Just two people who had finally learned that sometimes mercy begins with staying. The end.